All right, so we had 4 chapters again today. I posted the exercises again on the Google Plus page, if that's helpful for you, just collating all those end of the chapter projects for convenience sake. So those are up, 5 through 8 are up. The first chapter had to do with faith. So Janet, talk to us about faith and vision. What hit you in that chapter? What was helpful? What was not helpful?
And I liked how in the beginning he talks about that just even vision in and of itself is a way to sort of live out our faith in the truest sense, that pursuing a divine vision is really an act of worship. It's a declaration of our confidence in God. And I think that really is true. As God gives us those things or puts those things in our heart, as we move forward with them, it really does take us depending on him to try to carry them out. And, you know, as you get discouraged along the way or as things come up, it's just, again, going back to having confidence in his call and that he's the one that's called us to do it. And then I like the top of 64. He says that the more unlikely the fulfillment of our vision, the more faith that is required, and consequently, the greater the potential for God's glory. So again, I know for me, when there's sort of smaller things, it's easier to accomplish in my own power and my own abilities. It's easy to kind of forget the faith part. And when he puts these huge things on my heart, it's like, I can't do that, but it keeps me going back to him and trusting him for it. And then again, I liked he talks about he delights in our perseverance in the face of debilitating odds. That's just a word. Persevere has been a word that God's just been speaking to me over and over, just in this latest season through a bunch of other things that I actually just shared at. We had a prayer night recently for our Rooted Discipleship groups that I just shared a little bit there about kind of some things that God's been doing in my life, and perseverance is just one of those words. Just persevere in the season and through some hard things. And so it's just interesting that word, it seems like every day somewhere God hits me with that word. So it was in this as well. And again, that that he's the focal point of the visions. Again, it's never about us. It's always about him. Talks again about Nehemiah praying, so I prayed to the God in heaven, and it was that act of faith. He wasn't depending on his preparation. He's depending on God. Again, any of these visions, if they're God-sized visions, you can't depend on ourselves, but we have to depend on God to accomplish it for him. And I also liked how he talked about maybe, I don't know if it was actually this chapter, but it was God engineering the circumstances. It wasn't just that God had called me to do this, but the time now was because God had engineered these circumstances, and that was, kind of what was calling him to do things at that moment. And then that oftentimes once we start experiencing a little bit of success, it's easy to kind of get on our own. Okay, I can handle it from here. Thanks God for giving me the vision and getting things started. I'll, rely on my ability and myself to take it from here, but that we need to just continue to trust him in those circumstances. And then the top of 69, again, I sort of asterisk this part, it says, so be encouraged. The agony you are experiencing is normal. The loneliness you feel is to be expected. The sleepless nights when you stare up into the ceiling and think, what have I gotten myself into, are part of the process. All of these experiences will ultimately lead you to the conclusion, God, if you don't come through, I'm sunk. And that is exactly where he wants you to be and stay. For this reason, men and women of vision are men and women of faith, and through their faith, God is honored. I think that really captured a lot of what he was talking about in this chapter, and just kind of reminded me again of, why I do what I do. And when I have those sleepless nights and I'm thinking about, how do I get all these people discipled? How do I get all these people in groups? What's the vision? What's God calling me to do in this season? It's like, okay, just I have to keep going back to him and trusting him for just the confidence and the faith that he's going to carry out what he's called me to do. And I have a part to play. Obviously, I need to use my gifts and skills and plan and pray and do all of those things. But ultimately, it's my faith in God and my dependence on him that's going to accomplish what he's called me to do. So.
Yeah, that's good. And that faith chapter I thought was good with a lot of those connecting points. It's also, there's an inherent contradiction in there as well, which I think is something that I wish he'd talked a little bit more about. And that is, the whole faith component has to do with, the things not seen, right? And now we're talking about vision, which is attempting to see things. And, there's a tension there. right? There's a tension between those things. I think part of how we solve the tension is by the big question. And sometimes that's helpful and accurate, and sometimes it just isn't. Sometimes the vision is not necessarily big, it's just the right direction. And it's just that we can't see the end. And so the vision sometimes comes in component parts, right? So this is the vision right now. And then when I get there, the things that I thought might have been the ultimate end of the vision are actually in a different direction. So it's actually God kind of stepping me through many steps to get to where he wants, because I actually can't see accurately what that end vision is. Mm-hmm. So maybe one of the things I think needs to be incorporated into any sort of vision component is flexibility.
Yeah.
Because even if I, compose a vision and see beyond where God wants me to go, at that point I need to be flexible to say, God's changing the vision to go this direction. And that's sometimes hard. That's sometimes a hard one. It looks, from a leadership perspective, like, we don't really know what we're doing. And there can be discouragement in that, as opposed to, we need to reflect now and see where we go to from here. Our property vision is kind of that way out here, where we've had a vision to buy property, but we're not ready to build. So it was like, let's do this now, because there's going to come a time where we'll want to build, but we don't know what that looks like. Mm-hmm. And so that's a harder vision also to cast, because you're constantly telling people, well, this is a piece, and we're not privy to the other piece yet. And so sometimes people want to go farther than the vision God has given you actually allows. So those are kind of interesting pieces when you start talking about faith. And I think the whole vision thing, by definition, brings attention into faith, not just from the standpoint of doing big things, but, it's the attempt to see things that are not yet in our scope. So,
yeah.
And, so that's a good one. I think faith is a hard one. I think vision is a hard one. And just always attention and a conversation, I think he gets to that later when he talks about going public.
Yeah.
And having the incorporation of other people into it. All right, Greg, do you have anything to add to the faith chapter? Welcome, Clint. I got your texts.
Well, it was kind of interesting, the couple of the highlighted parts that Janet brought up are the things that was almost like I spent a lot of time underlining and asterisking myself on that. And a couple of things that I saw that hit me was Abraham's faith that fueled his vision. And that was when it went back, that's back on page 65, it was talking about that. And pursuing a vision, then he turns around and he says, pursuing a vision requires faith. And then when it hit me, it says, pursuing a vision will test, stretch, and at times exhaust your faith. And while you're pulling your hair out, God revels in the glory that he receives. And as I looked at that, over that in my mind, I was thinking, yeah, you have to continue. When it says that it's going to test, stretch, and exhaust your faith, you're surrendering everything, and you're trusting with everything you got in God, and that is bringing him glory. And then it says, while we're waiting and trusting, that the glory is being reflected back to God by the faithful servants, and it's he glories in our willingness to take him at his word. And that was one spot that just really hit me a lot on that faith chapter. And then like the last part where Janet had talked about where he was tying it all in, and I was sitting there, and how many, all of us have sat there with sleepless nights and thinking back, oh my gosh, and I'm going to be sunk if God can't. And we're just totally surrendering everything we got to him and looking to him, knowing there's no way we can do anything with that. So those were a couple areas on the faith that really jumped out at me. And so that was that. on the faith.
Okay. Hey, Clint, how about some of your perspective at this point? I think we're just talking about the faith chapter. So what did you pull out of that chapter? What was helpful for you from chapter 5?
I enjoyed the first thing that stuck out to me was the faith is confidence that God is who he says he is and that he will do what he promised to do. And I think everything just kind of based off of that first sentence. When I was going through just understanding Joshua, Jericho, and then Gideon, and then David, that's kind of stuff that stuck out for me. And I think and then also just as I read through it, Nehemiah, how the king granted him his wishes, and so I saw that God's hand was all over it. So I really just appreciated that part of it. But I think as I was trying to picture myself in these instances, he also talks about, or Andy was talking about one of his buddies that had taken over, how'd you get into this? And he starts explaining his vision of what God had put out for him, the excitement, and then why he was about to go into lawsuits and going back and forth. He goes, it looks like he took the reins over from God. And so I sit well with that, and trying to think that, no, I have to do this. I'm going to do these things for God. And then maybe I'll let God know about it. And so I have to be very aware of that. So that's kind of stuck out to me as a good reminder of that. I have to remember that everything that I do is just by his grace and by his allowance and because he loves me as his son. And I have to get in line with that. And the more that I'm in line with him, the better it seems to go. So, that about covers 5 from all my notes that I had. Taking leaps of faith, absolutely. I mean, leaps of faith and praying on my part for doing what I do. I see that a lot, and I see that I have to make sure that I rely upon him and go back to my notes from 5 to 7 years ago, how he's provided so well in so many different ways, and in ways that are different than I even expected, in ways that I didn't want that ended up happening that I was really appreciative of. So
good. Now, one of the things I think is interesting as well, I'm the senior here, so you have a sense of vision being a huge component in what the senior does. And then when you have people working under you, you want them to have vision as well for their particular piece of ministry and their life. And so you have this challenge of what I call vision underneath vision, and helping people fulfill their vision and also helping them to dovetail vision together with your own, which I guess is another aspect of the team component in ministry and in leadership, building a team component and creating a vision that has compatibility at the team level. That's a huge piece of the nut. So I think that's one of the challenges of leadership too, that needs to be talked about. It sounds to me, again, like you guys do that fairly well in Ventura. But you've also had some transitions. So, that probably has, what's the right word? Kind of, an impact on your own vision. I mean, I create a vision under one regime and then a new regime comes in and hopefully it's compatible. But that's an important dynamic on a multi-staff or even in a broader church level, because, it's not just getting people to buy into your vision. It's getting people to cast vision that's compatible with the vision that exists at the church. And, working at enhancing that, working at compiling those things together. I think the only way to do that is, again, part of what we talked about in this chapter about faith is recognizing that the vision itself is from God. And so the submission isn't to the senior and his particular vision. It's we've come to a place where we recognize this comes from God, and so we are all on board for that reason. And when you take that even into another category, so if you're casting vision in your marriage together, that becomes really the thing as well. It's not what I want or what you want. So what does God want us to do? And how do we arrive at that? So that becomes, I think, another component of this vision nut that those of us who work on teams need to work on more closely together. how does that work? So I think mostly, I think the video that I put on the Google Plus page initially this year, the Simon Sinek one on what is your why, can really help with that, where organizations agree on the purpose, the why they exist, and then the vision can flow out of that purpose and actually has compatibility with that purpose. That's also a very important thing, especially as you get into the team dynamic. So, all right, let's move on to the next chapter. For those of you who are wondering, I'm letting Alex has requested just to listen, so I'm not gonna ask him to buzz in, but we'll just let him listen in. So the next chapter is taking inventory, and I really liked the subtitle, or the initial quote is, if your vision is for a year, plant wheat. If your vision is for 10 years, plant trees. If your vision is for a lifetime, plant people. But any takeaways from this passage or this section that you want to share or talk about? And we'll start with you again, Janet.
Sorry, you caught me off guard. I thought I was done. That's the problem with a small class, right? You got to be ready to.
Yeah, I gotta figure it out on the fly now.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Again, the walk before you talk, I thought that was really good. Just that Nehemiah didn't share his vision with anybody for at least 3 days. Kind of took the time to sort of take inventory and really kind of inspect the walls and, kind of walk and see what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish before you start, going public with it and getting everybody else on board. I think that, and then he talked about during that time, there's 3 things that happen. Vision can get confirmed, which, sometimes it's like, okay, once you get into it, you realize, okay, yeah, I really am called to do this, or this is really where we want to go. Or, is it, we move forward, this is a God thing, or your vision might get defined a little bit. Like you even talked about earlier, that whole flexibility and that visions, can kind of change sometimes as you begin to investigate what you thought, maybe one thing as you learn and get different pieces to the puzzle. It's like, okay, well, maybe it gets defined a little bit more or tweaked a little bit. Or you might learn that, hey, this was just a good idea. It wasn't really vision. And you end up deciding that this isn't what I'm called to do, or the vision that God's given me for this time. So, and then I actually thought the other part that was really good in this chapter was that, this is on 81, I guess. More importantly, you need to know what you are leading other people up against. You need to know everything there is to know about the environment you are expecting other people to follow you into. Nehemiah knew, he had firsthand knowledge, and it talks about one of the reasons we lean towards sharing our vision too soon is that we feel that burden of the vision resting on our shoulders, and that sort of sense of responsibility. But I thought that was really good, that, again, sometimes it can be premature and kind of getting the vision out there before really sort of, thinking through it a little bit, taking some time to learn and investigate and pray and kind of know what we're asking other people to join us in. I think all of a sudden, there's all these questions. It's like, oh, I really haven't thought through this mission, I guess. So again, I think there's a place for both. Obviously, there's a place where you do want to bring people in early on so they can help you build that vision. But I think there's also a place of kind of at least having done a little bit of the homework before you go there. Yeah, I think those were kind of the main takeaways. It also, at the, I guess, top of 82, it's easy to forget that God-ordained vision is not our responsibility. We have a role to play, and our role is our responsibility, but the vision is God's responsibility. And again, I think he does a good job throughout all the chapters of keep putting it back on that responsibility being God, and that what could be and should be won't happen until God allows it to be and orchestrates those circumstances.
Yeah, good. Greg, add some thoughts to chapter 6.
Okay. Yeah, the investigating was important. But really what I thought, and he had tied it in earlier, was the 3 things: confirming the divine origin and giving it further definition. But it was also that it said about, is it truly my vision or is it God's vision? Is it, and he had previous state, is this a good idea or is this a God idea? And by that, I thought he tied in that part for me, I should say. And also, if it is God's vision, it doesn't mean we take it immediately and run with it, which I thought was really important. He's going to put the pieces together in the vision. And that was from last week's lesson, tying it together here, or it did for me, was that, okay, making sure it is God's vision and not my personal vision, and that it's God's idea, not a good idea. So that part was what kind of jumped out at me mostly there. And he reiterated that on 82, our natural tendency was to take a vision and just run with it. And he also stated that if it's God-ordained vision, the vision is not my responsibility. It was God's responsibility. But I have a role to play in that vision just as long as and everybody that's in the body of Christ. And but the vision is God's, and I'm just playing a particular role in that. And then there was three things that keep people from fully investigating their visions: impatience, pride, and fear. And so that was kind of something there that you have to look. And also on that vision, that you when you're taking the inventory and you're looking at it, because a lot of times he did say if you come right out and say it, a lot of people are not going to get on board with you. And you have to take that in time, just take the inventory, make sure it's God's vision. It's all in God's timing and not ours. A lot of times we see something, man, that would be really great, and we want to jump and go for it. But it was that just waiting on the Lord in that situation. So that was the key points for me.
Okay, good. Clint, anything there to add? And if not, move on to the last two chapters, which we'll take as a unit.
Yeah, just exactly what Greg was saying. He said distinguish between that good cause and that God-ordained vision. And that kind of just stuck with me. There's so many great causes out there, and I wrote down tons of things that we're involved in, like going, we should just pass those up because there are things that are better and God-ordained and specific for who we are. So that's about all I have to add.
Yeah. I think one of the benefits to being a staff member as opposed to kind of pastors, seniors tend to be jack of all trades, is there's been some level of frustration for me in connecting the vision for the church with my own personal vision, which sometimes is that passion is tied into your own skill set, your own giftedness, right? So I have passion for certain kinds of things. And then I look at the church and I say, well, okay, yeah, but the organization needs this kind of a vision. And so sometimes it's easier when we talk about that part of it to talk about our personal vision, that this is the component of personal vision that is related to the things that really burn a hole in my, whatever that cliche is. I'm the worst with cliches. I think I memorize half of them, and then you start it, and then you end up, doing the whole mixing and matching. I think burning a hole in my pocket has nothing to do with, the passion for ministry. Anyway, I'll laugh at myself. So sometimes, organizationally, you buy into vision that has, the organization's passion, but my part of it is a different passion. So that's kind of an interesting component there as well. The thing I highlighted from this passage was once God decides something needs to be done, it's never a matter of if. The issue is usually who will step forward, embrace the vision, and move ahead by faith. So I kind of wonder, in Nehemiah's case, he uses Nehemiah as the example, whether building a wall was in his wheelhouse. Was that what he really wanted to do? Or was it simply what was needed to be done? So sometimes I grapple with that too, because again, I'll use one component of our vision here, which was property that I have absolutely no interest in. I could care less about buying, developing property. It's not my passion. It's not what I'm interested in doing in ministry. But as we decided what the vision needed to be the last decade, that was it. It was, we need to buy this piece of property. And so we did. And, it's like, okay, great. I'm glad that's done. Let's move on. And now my challenge is that I won't go back to that until I feel a real sense of compelling need to do so. And so it's kind of like our challenge right now is that it almost feels like we bought the property and now we're simply paying taxes on it. So what was the point? So there's this tendency now that to lose the vision of that and having people react negatively to it. So that's another huge component, right? Is the vision driven by my passion, or is the vision driven by God's desire? And then do I put off my passion to pursue God's desire for a time? So sometimes, it's easy to write a book about that, and it's like, okay, but what about this? So I totally agree with what you just said, Clint, but that caused that little rant to come off. So it's like, yeah, I don't. That was our vision. That's what we had to accomplish. That's what we put a lot of time and effort and energy into. But it really did not dovetail with my personal passion. And I wonder if that was the case for Nehemiah too.
Got it.
And that's very possible because what the motivation for Nehemiah was? Apparently embarrassment. It's like, it wasn't passion so much as it was shame. That this series of events and this scenario that's in place is unacceptable and it has to change. And so, I'm thinking, so for me, sometimes my vision personally might be fueled by getting this piece in place that will enable the long-term vision, but to happen. And so that may have been the case for Nehemiah as well. All right, the last two chapters had to do with beginning to go public or start the implementation process. I'm kind of with you, Janet, as well. I think there's times where, I speak the vision before I do the investigating, just to kind of get a sense of, is this a harebrained idea? Because I tend to be that guy. I tend to be a visionary, but that means a lot of thoughts come down into my head. So, for instance, a couple months ago, I started thinking about this corner piece of property in our town that's just a dump. It's got a tire shop on it, and it's the key corner of our property, but it's horrible. It's just absolutely horrible. And for the last 20 years, I've been saying we need to figure out how to knock down those 3 buildings and build something else. So I asked our elders if they were interested in buying it. And they looked at me like I was crazy. But anyway, I didn't do any investigating. I threw that out there, and then I just totally dropped it. I'm not even investigating it. So sometimes that helps too. What did you get from the going public section? And I'll start with you again, Janet.
Actually, I like going first rather than last because at least you can just say whatever you want. You don't have to fill in what everybody else has already covered. Find other things.
Well, next week you'll go last. I'll make a note.
I know. I always go last. You always save me for last. So in these chapters, he's talking about those 4 components of an effective vision: of the problem, solution, the reason something must be done, and the reason something must be done now. And I thought that building block 7, we talked about communicate your vision as a solution to a problem that must be addressed immediately. I thought that was interesting, just that whole time piece, because oftentimes we have these visions or we think these things to be accomplished, but why now? Why is, and I think he did a good point of talking through that in here. I mean, the walls had been, ruined for a while. It wasn't like this just happened, and they sort of gotten used to the fact that the walls were torn down. They hardly noticed them anymore, and yet, why now? And I thought he did a good job of, I think this was helpful for me, really framing it in terms of the problem. What's the problem? What are we trying to fix here? What is it that we want to accomplish? And what's the problem that your vision addresses? The problem is not the vision. The solution is the vision. So again, as you come up with this vision, what is it that we're trying to, problem we're trying to solve there? And then the solution, again, Nehemiah says, let's build the walls. So the vision has to be a solution to a problem. So what is it that's not not working? What is it that I see could be better? What is it that I want to, or God wants to accomplish? And then how do we do that? And then kind of jumping into the next couple chapters, just hitting those other things, the reason. So what's the incentive? And I think we do this all the time. I think we put visions out there and we say, we're going to do this or we're going to accomplish this, but we don't necessarily have that incentive. We don't necessarily get people kind of on board with where we're going or what we're trying to do. It says Nehemiah's vision wasn't so much about rebuilding a wall as it was about reestablishing context for God to demonstrate his power and fulfill his promise to his nations. All divinely inspired visions are some way tied into God's master plan. So, and again, I think finding ways to, like, how do we get other people into that vision? How do we give them incentive to see, what it is that needs to be kind of accomplished? And then, it says, when you finally zero in on why your vision must be accomplished, you'll find yourself energized by the mere thought of what you have been called to do. Why translates into urgency and incentive. So again, he took you through all those different questions. What difference will it make? Why should I do this? Why am I the one to do this? Why is not someone else's thing? And they kind of drilled down through all of those different questions till they finally got to, kind of the end result. And then the timing, why do we do this now? We've had this problem in the church for years, or we've had, we haven't had property for years, or again, whatever the case may be, why now? And again, I mentioned this, I think, in the very beginning, but just that sometimes we just see that, God's, sovereign timing of the circumstances, and he's, orchestrating things, and it's like, okay, this is the time, and, to move forward and begin to kind of accomplish that vision and those kinds of things. So, and then I thought the other thing, again, just casting the vision and talking about how getting people involved. He talks about people will give sacrificially toward a vision that bears the marks of God's involvement. So again, so we've got to go back to, it has to be God's vision. I mean, if it's just my thing or it sounds like a good idea, it's going to be really hard to get people on board and get that incentive and buy-in. And but if they see that it's this big thing that God's going to accomplish, that's what people want to be about. Right. So I think those are some good points.
Good. Right on. Greg, you want to add something to that?
Sure. A couple of spots that really hit me was the section on page 89, what about you? And it was kind of interesting that if you cannot convey the vision clearly, little chance anyone will walk with you with a clear picture of that. And it was talking about an accurate picture. You have to be able to convey that accurate picture. And that's what happens here in the minds of the listener. And he ties it in because no one accomplishes a God-given vision alone. And I thought that was a couple of things. Granted, all the four components and everything that Janet had went over, there was some other things, and all divinely, visions are tied to God's master plan. But there was one thing here, I was looking here for my notes on it. Let me find the right page. I think it was on 90. About timing. Yeah, that was it, on timing. That's what I really remember, and I have it marked here now. Why at this time? And he had went on there and he said there was two questions. What difference is it going to make? And why should I attempt this? And then he kept asking repeatedly, why should I attempt this? And he kept going on and on. And he gave an excellent scenario on a bunch of things there with, the two couples or the couple living together and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, man, that was really good. How continuing to ask these questions show it. So it's timing, and the timing has got to be critical, because he even says it here, but he had said it before, is that God's working behind the scenes orchestrating everything. And if God's working behind the scenes orchestrating everything, there's a perfect time for our role in the vision, in God's vision. And that was critical, because he's all the time working behind the scenes. And if we're seeking him and it's his vision, there's the exact right time that we play our part in God's vision. So that was really, really, really a couple of things that just hit me, saying those two questions, continuing to repeatedly ask. These were the things that really struck out to me on going public on this.
All right, Clint, how about you? Last couple chapters.
Yeah, as far as 8, I think they covered it pretty well. Going into 9, it's the main part, and it kind of stuck out at the top of 96. We said, "Come, let us in Jerusalem that we." So everything was we, our, us language. It was an inclusion. It was an invitation. It was, this is what I'm hearing God say. This is how I hear God's doing it for us, and this is where I'm going with it. And he went to the people around and he included everybody. And I think that's what happens with visions that we believe could be God ordained. But if we don't include those around us that are going to walk side by side with us and shoulder to shoulder, then we drop the ball. And regardless if it's a lead guy, or if it's me in business, or if it's a guy who's in his family, if I can't communicate with my wife correctly, then how together are we going to be on the same page correctly communicate with our kids? So I think that challenge could be, and that leadership challenge can actually be spread out in a lot of different ways. Obviously, if we're talking specifically in the church, we have to share with the people. And I know there's appropriate time and the appropriate people, but if we think we have the appropriate people, we got to make sure that they're on board with us and really be convinced and not be afraid to ask a question. Are we not all together on this same page? And if you're hearing something different than me, because I think back then maybe it is, Nehemiah's like, that's easy. I heard this from God. This is what he said. But if someone tells me, hey, Clint, God told me to do this, and this is what we're going to do, I'm like, okay, I can get behind that if I have some equity in that relationship. But if someone just says, hey, this is where God's going to do it, what do you guys think? It seems like we're sitting on sand. It's not on solid blocks. So yeah, so when we start talking about the building blocks and he lists here, it just got me thinking on a couple of those things. But the key thing was including other people in the vision that God has for you. And he's got to put those people around you. Let's make sure that they're on board. And if they're not, then maybe it's not the right people. It's not the right team. And that's okay also. So that's all I got.
Okay. Yeah, I don't, that may be the most important key to vision casting in an organization with a group of people. If they don't feel part of the process, if they don't feel that God is speaking with them as well about this vision, good luck. And you'll find people will undermine it, people won't get behind it, and you won't be able to accomplish it. So that component of going public and getting people on board is critical. And I think one of the things that you need to be aware of is the bigger the vision, the more time that'll probably take. It's just an important piece that needs to be put together, and it needs to be given its just due. Even the quote that I referenced at the beginning of chapter 5, I think, or 6, whatever that one was, the trees, the wheat, the trees, the people. Visions have different timeline components. Some vision has a long-term component, some has a short-term component. And even though I love that quote, we need to make sure that, it's important to plant wheat. It's important to plant trees. And it's important to plant people. It's not necessarily one or the other. And I don't know that quote is necessarily saying that, it's more important, or planting wheat is not important. It's not an important vision. But at every one of those levels, including people on board, is important. This is what we're doing. And then this is why we're doing it is also kind of an important thing. One cautionary thing that I reacted kind of negatively to, and I'm not sure that he followed up enough on, was under the visionary project number 7, question 1, what problem does your vision propose to solve? And then the second bullet under that, or on the sheet that I provided, the B, it says it could be your vision is intended to keep something from becoming a problem. This is usually the case when someone develops a vision for his or her family. The goal is to avoid problems rather than to solve them. And I would amend that statement to say, if my vision starts out with a problem that I'm trying to avoid, that I need to do more work to say, here's the problem I want to avoid, and here's the result I want to have. Because if you don't, I'll give you an example. We have a great friend. We love her to death. Bem's death. They have they had a child later in their lives, So raising a high school daughter late in life. And she made an offhanded comment at a dinner we attended. She said, my goal is to make sure she gets through high school without becoming pregnant or being on drugs. So her vision for her daughter was that I'm trying to avoid potential problems. And we walked away from that just saying, oh man, that, that can't be your vision.
Ouch.
It cannot be your vision just to avoid problems. And I think that's a general truth. So that even if I do say, here, I have this as a goal, I don't want my kids to be pregnant, I don't want my kids to be on drugs in high school, that if I'm going to plant a vision, I've got to actually frame that in a positive way, in a positive sense. I've got to add the positive vision. Otherwise, it's not vision. It's something other than vision. It might be a noble goal at some level, but even at that, it's simply, for me, a starting place. And I think that's true in parenting. I think that's true in your marriage. I think that's true in everything. And, if your marriage is simply designed to not have, if that's your focus, we just don't want to have an affair. Well, great. That sounds marvelous. That's the kind of relationship I want to get into. And I think really the way to avoid it is by actually having a vision that combines passion and destination and all of those things. The way I'm describing my father role later in life, in terms of having a relationship with my kids, one part of it is I need to be an interesting person. And if I want adult children to have a relationship with me, I don't want it to be obligation. I'm your dad, you need to call me. You don't call me enough. I want it to be, well, I'm an interesting person. If they're interested in talking about baseball, I'm going to be on their list. If they're interested in talking about this, I'm going to be on their list. So they're going to call me because I'm an interesting person, and that fits into the context of things. And I think that's a principle that applies in all these areas. If you want to cast a vision, it's got to be interesting at some level. It just can't be, well, we don't want to screw up. So our vision is we don't want to screw up. Come to the church that doesn't want to screw up. You're not going to get a lot of jump in on that vision. So that one phrase, if I was his editor, I would have said, this is an insufficient statement. This isn't good. We need to add one more line to that statement. So if that becomes the motivation for vision, right? This is a problem to avoid. What's the vision to make sure that doesn't happen, and how is that framed positively? All right, I would encourage you to work through those projects when they're helpful and beneficial. If you have a vision, this might be a good time to review the vision. I think some of the stuff was helpful. Including people in your vision is helpful in many ways. If it's a personal vision and it doesn't really include their participation, getting people included in your vision helps you stay on beam to accomplish it. So that's also another component that's helpful here as well. All right. One last thing. Our class is almost over. This was a shorty, so we're 2 weeks in. So my plan is on March the 20th to be in Phelan. We'll do Phelan, not Riverside. I think that's easier for you guys, and it's no big deal for us. And then if we can do the 21st in Santa Paula, that would work well. Does that work?
Sounds good.
So we'll finish up
How about you, Janet?
with a lunch.
Works for me.
Yeah,
Did we decide noon was better for the Santa Paula meeting live?
No, I think earlier was better for Eric.
Earlier
Eric
was
has
better,
a noon every week.
Okay.
Clint and I have that meeting that goes till, what will you do, like 11?
Well, we could, but if Clint is willing, we can meet at 10.
Well, we have a staff meeting that
10:30.
goes till 10:30ish, probably, yeah, 10:15.
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
10:30 is perfect.
let's shoot to be there then, somewhere
Maybe like
between
10:45.
10:30 and 11.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll shoot to be there at 10:30. Whenever you guys get there, I'll tell you around 10:30 or so, and then when you guys get there, we can just start. That'll give us the most impact before Eric needs to leave.
Perfect.
Okay.
So, Greg, does that work if we meet at
You're not open yet.
2:50 on Sunday night?
Sure, what time?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock? That'll
Well,
be
you want would 5 o'clock work?
I can check with, well, we got Alex here, but I can check with the other and see. I'm sure either time will be okay.
Yeah, let's do 5 o'clock. That'll get us out to Moore Park a little earlier.
Okay, 5 o'clock on 20th.
Super. All right. Next week on Zoom, and then the week after in person.
Cool. Bye, guys.
Sounds good.
See ya.
Peace.